For anybody who wants to know what late capitalism in the 21st century looks like, go to the university, you'll see it. It's there.
We all like to deal with simple blocks of meaning, you know, simple phrases, simple truths, you know. We like to know who's going to listen, who outside academia are going to listen to us explain the difference between the two tiers, you know, the difference between contingent faculty. You know, are you a teacher or are you not? Are you a professor or are you not?
A lot of people don't know what an adjunct is. A lot of my students don't know what the difference is. They come up here to do conferences with me and they say, "Oh, is this your office? It's really cool." And I say, "No, I share this with a bunch of other adjuncts for the English department." And some people say, "Well, what's an adjunct?"
I know a lot of folks who worked as contingent faculty. They don't come from one perspective, they don't have one experience, they don't have one particular type of income even. It's a huge diverse group, and to lump them all together into this sort of junk term, adjunct faculty, like we're some sort of appendix. It's an adjunct, it means that you really aren't a part of the entire endeavor of the academy. And contingent at least gets a whole lot closer to the sort of honest truth, is that our jobs are contingent. They're contingent on all sorts of things.
Last semester I taught 4 sections of Comp 1. And then I taught Comp 1 at St. Rose and creative writing. My husband didn't see me, you know, hardly at all. And I decided to take 2 graduate classes as I'm pursuing my MFA. And I'm only teaching 4, but it's still a lot. It's still quite a challenge.
And how many students do you have, John? 100 students.
Well, no, now it's probably what, 90. Last semester it was 130. Insanity.
Come on down to the dawn of the world. Let's take that path through the atmosphere and give 4,000 answers to all of your questions, and maybe it will all become clear. Oh, take out your guitar and pray with the crowd in the palace. Oh, take out your guitar and pray with the crowd in the palace, in the palace.
In a piece some years ago, I described the English and foreign language departments as the fast food disciplines, because they really have originated the problem. I mean, they pioneered exploitation hiring amongst the faculty. It's one of their real achievements that they can go down in history for. The casualization and deprofessionalization of the workforce.
Well, I certainly think that English studies as a, you know, sort of writ large has been a gigantic contributor to the creation of our current conditions, to the extent, and you know, I mean, it gets into lots of internal disciplinary politics, I think, to lay out the reason I think that's true, with you know, departments becoming more and more financially dependent on general education writing courses and tenured faculty in other parts of our discipline besides writing who don't want to teach them and don't want to ever think about them.
As long as you have a universal requirement for writing courses, then there are going to be a lot of writing courses, and the university is going to say we can't possibly hire full-time people when you're running 150, 250, 300 sections a semester. That's just too many people. You're going to have to hire part-timers.
So what we're seeing in higher education is the same institutions that are producing new PhDs are also then eliminating the future jobs of those people by relying on graduate students and part-time faculty.
Obviously, from just an economic point of view, the number of PhDs, MFAs, MAs who are out there and the number of positions available for them on the tenure line as departments are currently constructed mean that there's a surplus.
I don't know if it's a dark secret, but you know, people in comp, we don't tend to talk about labor conditions quite so much. We kind of need an action plan, I think.
Well, this is capitalism as absolute perfection, because you have all these people making very little money doing the hardest work, supporting these programs so the people a little bit farther up on the pyramid can teach their medieval literature or their seminar in Emerson or whatever it might be.
So you said you want to meet with me today?
Yes. I am going to grad school in English.
No. I don't think that's a good idea. You will probably end up as an adjunct, getting paid less than many of the secretaries and janitors in the school.
I will work hard.
I had a lot of expectations about being an adjunct because it was never, you know, my goal. You don't never hear a first grader say, when I grow up, I want to be an adjunct teacher. You know, it's not something I planned on.
Of course, big problems are with compensation, with job security, with intellectual property. A lot of faculty are hired at the last minute. A lot of them never get support or training. A lot of them don't have offices or computers. They're often judged solely on student evaluations. Often they're not even evaluated. And so it's just a general kind of lowering of the quality of how faculty are treated, and it's a way of justifying paying faculty less money.
I think casualization came about as a result of monetary factors. It's a form of outsourcing, so just the way we lost a lot of our manufacturing base that went overseas because labor was cheaper. It's a lot cheaper to hire people off the tenure track and pay them a fraction of what tenure track people make.
Cost and control, that's what it amounts to. Administrators over the past 40 years have asserted tremendous control over the mission of the university in their terms, right? Which is to say, over the curriculum and governance of the institution, control over the spending of the funds. They've generated larger and larger pots of money through unheard of tuition hikes, and they have spent those funds on initiatives that they are deeply committed to, and which are not necessarily the same initiatives that the faculty are committed to.
I think the issue is becoming more and more visible, but the question is, it's unclear how people should feel about it, or just letting people know that, you know, your kids are going to be taught by non-tenured faculty. Well, they're general public person says, well, you know, I don't have tenure. No one else I know has tenure. Like, why should anyone have tenure? And everyone I know is part-time, or, you know. And so I think we have to talk about the quality of education issues and also look at the spending issues. Where is the money going? If it's not going to the faculty, where is it going? You know, what are the priorities of these institutions?
When state appropriations to higher education began to go down, administrators started replacing retiring tenured faculty with contingent faculty, quote-unquote temporary faculty. I say quote-unquote not because I'm a self-conscious ironist, but because they would be hired semester after semester, year after year after year. These were not temporary jobs, only technically. And they would teach twice the courses for half the pay.
The problem is a simple one. We've got this oddly tiered faculty system in which some people get paid quite a bit more than others. It creates inherent inequities. And anybody who's seeing what's going on says, well, we've got a growing college population, and how do you meet the need of putting a teacher in front of the classroom? So economically it makes sense to hire faculty who cost less to the university. I've had arguments or discussions, I think argument might be too strong a word, with some of my colleagues who are in higher administrative positions than I am, who tell me that really we owe it to the people of the state to provide the highest quality education at the lowest possible cost.
One reason that contingency has become as much of a standard practice as it has you know, my inclination is to want to put it in terms of neoliberal economics and the way that that's kind of become the dominant paradigm for higher education, minimizing costs, selling access to higher education as a kind of economic boon, saying, hey students, you can afford to go to college more easily if we can cheapen the cost of providing the workforce for you.
There's been a lot of talk at Hudson Valley lately, ever since the adjuncts hours and the number of classes they can teach has been lowered due to the Affordable Care Act and not wanting to see, it all sounds bad, doesn't it?
There is not necessarily a qualitative difference between someone who's a contingent faculty member and someone who is a full-time faculty member. But there is a difference in the realities that those two groups live within, okay? And it's those circumstances that impinge on every aspect of what we do.
I don't even think that the distinction between part-time and full-time faculty is in fact it's not a qualitative distinction. All it is the terms of your contract. You're employed in this way, on these terms, under these conditions, or under different terms with different wages. It's just, these are just employment categories. There's no, it's whether you're going to be, you might as well could say these are the people who are not going to be paid and these are going to be the people that are going to be paid. But the work is the same and the place wouldn't work unless these people were at the work.
The median wage is $800 per credit hour on a range of about $600 to $1,000 per credit hour, depending on, you know, whether you have a PhD or a master's degree, how long you've been there, how many courses you've taught. At $800 a credit hour, it's impossible to earn a living wage. The university limits an adjunct faculty member to only teaching 21 credit hours per academic year. So at $800 a credit hour, that's you know what, $16,800.
One semester I was on 3 campuses, and it's a lot of travel and less investment, even if you want to invest more in your students, and it's just not feasible. I guess I just imagined having more interaction with other adjuncts, other professors on a regular basis. And I guess I didn't think about just even the travel, right? And the logistical aspects of how split my time is. If I were on one campus, it would change everything.
I just was not educated to the realities of higher ed, its labor practices, its politics. So when I first got my first adjunct position, I really thought this was like the key to the Magic Kingdom.
When I got the job at Hudson Valley, everybody said, just wait it out because they are really good about hiring full-time after you've been there for a while. And they were really good about it until about the past 4 years, because the year that I came in was the last year that they hired anybody full-time.
And I worked real hard. I worked at many different campuses, but you know, once you get on the adjunct track, you stay on that. You tend to stay on that track.
The problem somewhat with contingencies is not that it's part-time, which is its own problem, but that it's perceived of as temporary, when in fact people are doing this like myself for 23 years.
If you look at all the areas where the use of contingent teachers is heaviest in higher education, you know, the need for it is going to be there for our great-grandchildren, let alone for the lives of the contingent teachers. So there's also there's no need for flexibility.
I remember back in 1995, the first time I was a WPA, or maybe it was 96, I had brought a proposal from the composition faculty to allow adjunct faculty to have a voice in our department executive committee. And I heard a range of really heartfelt arguments against doing that. 3 years later, we were able to get that done, but it was interesting to see just sort of the attitudes, the notion that these are short-time people. They are not committed to the department. They are not part of us. So I think part of it is this notion that the faculty really is composed entirely of tenure line, and other folks are there just to assist.
Come on down to the dawn of the world. Let's take that path through the atmosphere and give forth.
Well, you know, I'm a big believer in truth in advertising. I think, you know, parents would be kind of surprised to know that a huge number of their children's classes are going to be taught by people who, in some instances, you know, right on the edge of poverty.
There was a day not too long ago when I was looking at my bank statement and I needed to buy groceries, and I thought, well, I'll have to wait till the end of the week till I get my check. A student at the same time came into class and she was holding one of those like mocha latte grande Starbucks somethings. You know, they cost $5, something like that. And I just remember looking at this student and thinking that here she was buying this drink, and that's, you know, that's more than the half gallon of milk that I was going to be buying and couldn't afford at that point. And it was just sort of a moment for me, because it shouldn't be like that.
The thing that can improve the condition of my job, what I would have to say would be higher pay. And that is my reason for believing that is because it's difficult to live on an adjunct salary, and many of us pair it with different jobs and different professions and night jobs and side jobs, and as a result, it's difficult to focus solely on teaching.
I do have health insurance, but the funny thing about the health insurance is so expensive that you can't pay for you can't pay for a doctor's visit.
Well, they did actually offer health insurance, but they paid $0 of it, and it was $800 a month.
I don't have health insurance, and I haven't had it since 2009. So I go to Planned Parenthood because, you know, that's where I get my checkups and whatever I need. And so I was at Planned Parenthood in the waiting room one day, and one of my students walked in. And that was the most mortifying experience of my entire life. I don't want the students to see me at Planned Parenthood. And that's just one sort of example of how strange it is for me sometimes to be standing in front of them thinking, okay, you know, I want to give you the tools to be productive in society so that you can do better than what I'm doing for myself. You know what I mean? Like, so that you can go out and have a financial future that I'm not getting.
A couple of students said that they were going to, you know, they're looking for jobs for the summer. And I said, you know what? I'm in the same boat. I'm looking for work too. And I was very straight with them. I said, look, if you see me at the mall selling frozen yogurt, don't be surprised, because I can't find work right now.
And I understand why schools have set limits about how many courses you can teach as an adjunct, but the unintended consequence of that is the fact that we have to go and sort of, I hate to use the word prostitute yourself, but you end up sort of going door to door saying, hey, will you you hire me for 2 courses?
I think I would say to an adjunct, ally yourself with 1 or 2 people on campus who have had some experience with the institution, and really ask for what you need and be part of the conversation. Again, there's a little luxury of having some time to do that. If you're trying to have, you know, satisfy 2 masters, be at 2 different institutions, you may not have that opportunity to be as collegial.
Especially if you're on multiple campuses and you don't have necessarily a presence on your own campus, you can feel, I think, apart from rather than a part of.
I feel marginalized a lot of the time. I feel powerless sometimes, and it's a strange juxtaposition with the, the role of a professor.
I love my adjunct life, but it's partly because of where I am in terms of age and experience. If I were younger and starting out and didn't have some experience behind me, I think I'd be hoping I would always land somewhere full-time.
There's nothing I would change about the students or the other teachers. It would just be to be able to have a full-time position. That's the only thing that I would change.
You occasionally hear things, little snippets that make it kind of clear that maybe the work that you're doing, the position that you hold, isn't that important. Or you should be doing something more and better. You should get to a PhD program. You should get to a tenure-line position. And that kind of eats away at you a little bit.
In this job market, I don't even know that with a PhD if I will be able to get a full-time job.
Quite frankly, I don't know if I can afford to get my PhD to have more debt and less, or the same amount of opportunity. I just don't know that it's worth it.
So that if retention is a concern of colleges, and it is, that long-term necessity of having people who are committed to the college, committed to the students, is really an important factor in considering what is best for the larger community of the college.
Let's face it, we're addicted. Okay, the system is addicted to contingency. It's the fundamental business model in higher education.
Administrators are addicted to cheap labor, and that's all it is. It's cheap labor, but I don't think there are any arguments that contingency is a good thing for anybody. It's not good for the faculty, it's not good for the college, it's not good for the students, especially not good for the students.
Conditions of teaching are the same as the conditions of learning. Adjuncts typically teach the introductory elementary courses, the general education courses, so that for the first 2 years maybe, most students will encounter primarily adjuncts. And if they're running off to another job, if they don't have an office, that's certainly going to affect students.
I think that teaching conditions equals learning conditions is an equation that can go really in the wrong direction when people say, oh, that means that part-time people aren't teaching as well because they're not paid enough and so on to do a good job. And that's not what it means. It means the same thing that it would mean if you were looking at a hospital and there was a nurse who was responsible for 75 patients by herself. You would say, the working conditions there are going to affect the patient care. Even if she doesn't sit down all night, if she doesn't get dinner, if she's doing her very, very best, and 90% of the patients would say, gosh, this is a wonderful nurse and she's treating me great. It's inevitably going to affect the quality of care.
Well, I think a lot of contingent faculty are excellent teachers. Some are better than tenured faculty, but often they're working, without proper preparation or time to prepare. Often they're hired at the last minute. Sometimes they're forced to teach a book that they don't even know.
And then what's really bad is the things that start to appear tried and true are current traditional practices. And they're looked upon as rigorous, or there's no administrator in the whole university, and I would bet any university, who would complain about a TA or an adjunct giving grammar lessons. Yet we know those are ineffective. When it comes down to the effects on pedagogy, we're having a lot of undereducated people to begin with teaching introductory composition.
As I understand it, there's a lot of discussion now about, what to do with this massive adjunct pool and the labor force and the lack of, full-time positions that are available. And I would hope that there eventually comes some change, because I think that would help streamline writing instruction and give students much better access to, better funded, happier, smarter, more informed instructors.
It's like, hey, composition, after this 15 years or almost 20 years, we've become a field and we have understandings that we're going to move on and move forward with. And it never really happened, because all this composition theory never, ever took into consideration who is teaching this, the conditions under which they suffer, under which they toil.
Teaching the writing courses definitely has a different commitment, a different rhythm in the time that you devote to the reading of the writing. Takes time and care, and so there could be a lot of that conversation that goes on certainly outside of your classroom space. But I think it's necessary when you're teaching writing to continue that conversation as generously as you can.
So we're writing more than ever as a society. So if you can find the way to get each student connected to the importance of writing through something they enjoy already, that's kind of a huge task. There's only so much time in the semester to teach, certain things. Developing a thesis, research, knowing how to integrate sources into one's writing, both ethically and effectively. Understanding what it means to analyze something versus summarizing or responding. And then also, how to read.
The problem is that teaching writing remains a compulsory course at many universities, and yet it's not its own department, and it's often not taught by full-time faculty members who have an invested interest in the campus, but rather these full-time teaching appointments are broken up into bits and pieces, and they are scattered to adjunct professors who may or may not be able to return to that campus the next year, and who are overworked because they're also waitressing in the evening and working at another campus.
For me, it's having the flexibility, a little bit of my schedule. So Tuesday and Thursday I can be here, but then some of my students can't meet. So this morning I signed up for Friday morning to come in from 9 to 12 to meet with the students that way. But if I were an adjunct, let's say at 2 or 3 or 2 institutions, that could be tough.
You want people who really give a damn about their students and care about them. And you can teach the rest, but if you don't have that, you're host. And I think I've met so many contingent faculty that have that and are willing to do things above and beyond oftentimes what they're actually paid to do.
The policy at the community college where I teach used to be that you could have up to 4 courses without being full-time. With this new policy, they're saying they can't give us any more than 2 courses. So now they're hiring more adjuncts so they can give more 2 courses instead of fewer 4 courses. A lot of adjuncts are leaving. I know about 4 who have other job options right now and who probably won't be there next semester.
And there's adjuncts that have been teaching 4 classes for 15 years. And now half of their income is being cut. And it's not just here.
There's that sense that that person is a consistent member of the community, of the faculty. That's wonderful for students, especially if they've built a rapport and they really appreciate looking in the book and finding your name. They want to find you. They'll be like, why isn't she teaching that course? She's taught that before. I was hoping to take that course with her. And you just won't have it in your name won't be in the listing.
But if I have to leave teaching, which it's looking like I might have to do because I can't survive with 4 courses, it will kill me a little bit each day, mentally and emotionally. It really will.
Central to the issue of working as an adjunct in the humanities is this issue of why. Like, if you're going to pay us what you pay us, and if you're going to eliminate full-time positions all over the place, like, why even bother? Why are these things required? If institutionally, if you're not that interested in the outcome, then what are we showing up for? What are we making the students jump through these hoops for? So I think that all of those questions would be answered. The health insurance would be taken care of. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. Every time I go in to teach, I feel like I'm part of a problem.
I'm not doing it.
Truthfully, I love teaching, but I get really exhausted. At this point, I'm looking into other areas. I have one other job, 1 day a week, until a full-time position presented itself to me. I'm looking at what my options are.
Come on down to the dawn of the world. Let's take that path through the atmosphere and give for 1,000 answers to all of your questions, and maybe it will all become clear. Oh, take out your guitar and pray with the crowd in the palace. Oh, take out...
I mean, I feel like I've been reading so many things about it that it is out there, but who's reading it? You know, who's investing in it?
With the crowd in the palace.
If I'm teaching in an institution that's willing to hire me more or less sight unseen and doesn't really care what I do in the classroom, and isn't necessarily too concerned with what comes out the other end, how do you assert that it's as meaningful as what goes on in the bio lab or in the economics class or in the political science class or whatever, right? Like if the institutional policies and practices are tacitly suggesting that what goes on doesn't really matter and hey, everybody gets an A or B anyway, I think it's difficult. It's difficult not to fall into that place of being the archetypal frustrated composition instructor. If only the world understood. And the world's not going to understand, so we need to bring understanding to the world. And that's a hard thing to do.
We ought to be thinking about rhetorical arguments, the things that we can use to make real changes.
The appeal to I think, tenured track faculty is not only based on professionalism and ethics, it's also based on the self-interest of the faculty in maintaining its traditional areas of authority so that they can guarantee the quality of education. And that I think is also potentially an appeal to students and parents that they can understand. They may not care that much that contingent faculty are poorly treated because so are many other employee groups, but they might care that if faculty are contingent, if the majority of faculty are contingent, the control of the faculty to make good decisions in its areas of expertise is jeopardized. That's a big price for higher education to pay.
Most students are not aware of this whole issue of contingency, so we can start with the students, the student newspaper.
They buy fair trade coffee. How about fair trade education?
SEAS has its statement, and MLA has its statement, and NCTE has its statement, and everybody's got their statement about why the treatment of adjunct faculty is unjust and that we need to figure out more ethical ways to handle the situation, and everybody knows. I don't think there are very many people in our field who don't understand how bad the situation is.
If the larger culture, in the culture within the university, still thinks, well, you give them assignments and you correct the grammar and you give it back to them, why should they pay for it, right? If they don't really understand what we're doing and why we need to do things like have writing conferences and work through multiple drafts and the amount of time that takes and so forth, if we haven't made the first case, we can't make the second case. What we need to do is show them how it's in the interest of the way they want to think about education to have students who are thoughtful, critical, rhetorical savvy readers and writers, and that's what we're doing. It's not just an instrumental kind of transcription that we do when we teach writing, but this is a fundamental core function of the university in every way.
So we as compositionists really need to band together and make a national assault on the media about what good composition instruction should look like.
What I've tried to do and move more towards is sort of action. It's nice to theorize about these things, but that at the end of the day, I don't think that does a damn thing. We got like rhetoric over here, and we got this action over here. We bring them together, and we got reaction, baby. I mean, like, whoa.
It came about slowly. A lot of us were not paying attention, and now there's this huge problem, and it's going to take a while to rectify it. But I think eventually it will be changed. It's going to take a huge effort, though.
It is our duty to stand up and to speak out when there is injustice in the workplace, in our society, and when we refuse to do that out of our own fear, then we're actually contributing to the problem.
Until you have a lot of contingent faculty as sort of part of the process, they're going to have their identities made for them by people who don't share the same sort of material conditions.
The first thing that I think adjuncts must do is they have to stop thinking of themselves as these professionals who are privileged, who should be happy they're working in the university because of the luxury or flexibility of the situation. They got to start thinking themselves as labor, as the working class of the university.
If we're working people, we need to align with working people. And I think that's what we are. Academic workers, but working people nonetheless.
In the history of labor struggles, the workers have had to take action to make things better. I can't think of one labor struggle that was averted because the management said, you guys are just working a lot harder than we're giving you credit for. We need to give you guys raises and better benefits and better work conditions. We're going to get right on that.
One of the obvious things a union can do is to say no more than X percentage of courses on this campus will be taught by contingent faculty. You can have that written into a contract. Otherwise, what have you got? A hope and a prayer of doing that kind of work. So I think actually unionization has become practically the only way of sustaining instruction as the primary function of a university.
I pay union dues, but I don't know what I pay them for. My sense is that, the full-time faculty are much more participatory in the union.
I think the one way that you make your labor matter sometimes to management is you withhold it.
I wish you could, as a generation, you could hold the line. You could say, I'm not going to accept a position on these terms. It's insulting.
If all of the adjuncts across the country went on strike, then the colleges would have a very big problem. Everything would shut down.
I want to be able to say, stand up and scream and yell and stomp your feet until people get it, but people get fired for doing that. I want to be able to say, organize, unionize, collectivize, people get fired for that.
If the laborers go out and are the ones to picket, then will they still have a job the next semester?
Thanks to really some leadership on the part of tenured people who were willing to stick their necks out, I got involved at sort of a different level. I don't think I would have, frankly, done that independently because I had certainly gotten the message over the years that these were not issues that you challenged because, of course, you were contingent and at any moment could be asked to go.
I know many, many, many tenured faculty who are absolutely appalled at the working conditions of contingent faculty and are not afraid to say so, but more need to speak out.
We need to be maybe a little more locally focused and actually look around and say, that group of people down the hall, who are they? What are they doing? Maybe I should talk to them, for heaven's sake.
There are active ways to support people who need the support. And if we're in a position that's, yes, privileged with a capital P enough to be able to do it, then where aren't we? But I don't think a great deal is going to happen until people like me who are, tenured and promoted and what have you, are willing to say, no, I will not ask for reassigned time for research. I will not ask for reassigned time for parts of my job that don't directly support my department and the faculty in my department because I'm a whole lot more concerned about the people who are working here than I am about whether I get to publish this article in 1 year or 2.
Yeah, we need to certainly be unified as tenured faculty, but what we need to do is take the game to the people with the money and the people who set the larger policies. That's where things have to change.
If people were to engage in collective action, which was actually just individually asking out of contracts, they can get more salary. I mean, I know if I were the WPA and I'd had that happen to me, I'd be screaming at my dean. I'd be resigning from my position. I'd be saying, no, I can't do this. You need to find some money, and we need to find it now that we can hire back these people who are dependable, who do their job as well as they possibly can, and perhaps who, if we pay them better, they can do their job even better.
But when I think about my work as director of the composition program, my #1 goal was to raise pay for the adjuncts, a goal at which I failed miserably. It's like being the manager of a restaurant. You don't own the restaurant. You can't set the menu, you can't set the pay rate for the waiters. All you can do is run the day-to-day operations. It's middle management, and middle management is almost always, and very often justifiably, unpopular for those very reasons, because you're carrying out the orders of people you often disagree with and exploiting people with whom you may have a lot more sympathy and feel you have more in common, but you can't really do anything for them.
People at the higher levels of the university systems alike, you want to make them a little bit ashamed even that they are trying to sort of exploit a class of people. And, you know, sort of not talking about it, not making public, just allows it to keep on going as it is.
The contingent problem is a problem of gender. It's a class problem, but it's also incredibly a problem of gender. And if we don't attack it as such, and I think that's another political statement we could be making to departments. I think it's another political statement we could be making to presidents, to boards of trustees, to say, you have a huge gender inequity here.
But here's the issue. We've got very bright people in contingent positions who have not seen a pay raise in a while, who are likely to start organizing unless the university does something to show that they care and are concerned about their positions. What are we going to do? Are we going to wait till this blows up? Are we going to start putting people into longer-term positions? Are we going to start increasing salaries? And the answer actually has been at my institution to put people in longer-term positions and start raising salaries. They're not at a level that's adequate yet, but it's better.
I may continue to agitate for a lot of things at different levels, but there's also the case of what you can try to achieve and what you can get. And I'm sure there are other people you're talking to who will say this is the wrong tactic, but at some level I'm pragmatic about it. You know, what can we get now?
But if you can put some more bucks into each adjunct's pocket, that could be done tomorrow. There's money on those campuses. You can't tell me the football stadium or reconstructing it or putting more seats in it is more important than paying the people teaching.
Renewable contracts have been a strategy that many colleges and universities have undertaken. Certainly we can go back to Wyoming and the idea of the humane lectureship, the idea that with some degree of continuity and that people could at least enjoy the sense of job security, if not the reality of it. While that hasn't been entirely successful, it certainly offers something more than the semester by semester contract or the year by year contract, which still remains a very common practice.
Providing some job security, continuing contracts.
Offering longer term contracts.
Well, I think the most likely solution is going to be specialized positions. We haven't been successful in higher ed for arguing for more tenure lines, and with the economic situation the way it is, it's likely that we'll continue to be put off on that for a number of years. So I think we need to look at alternatives that sort of debunk this notion of a two-tier system and say we have about a 25-tier system.
There are a lot of places now that have been able to turn most of their positions into term positions. And you know, term positions meaning, you know, the terminology varies, right? But by that I mean non-tenure track, but full-time with benefits and so forth. And I think places like, you know, Doug Hesse, what he's done at the University of Denver, has really been amazing. And I think those are really good jobs.
Places like Penn State and Duke have something called the Professor of Practice, which is a very interesting idea. These are non-tenure track positions, but they carry rank. And they have a degree of sort of credibility and distinction associated with them. They're legitimate positions, they're term positions.
If you look at what's happened with the ameliorative strategies over the past 30 or 40 years, what you've seen is a massive growth in full-time, non-tenure track, teaching-only appointments. And that represents nearly 20% of the academic workforce, which is to say roughly the same number of people who are tenured. If you wanted to double overnight the percentage of faculty who are in the tenure stream, one strategy would be to move all of those people into teaching-intensive tenure track appointments for a relatively modest cost over what they're being paid right now.
So I think the federal government, which provides so much financial aid and Pell Grants and different types of funding, should have a certain kind of requirement that, 75% of the faculty are full-time. There should be some, effort by the federal government to involve themselves in this.
We need to get our professional organizations even more involved in this. They need to be doing some research on what are the effects of the long-term growth of non-tenure line positions. What are we giving up by not putting people into positions that are secure, that allow them to grow as teachers, that allow them to contribute to the life of the department? I think that's one of the issues that we really ought to be looking at.
Universities can change and, sort of tack in the same way that oil tankers can. It's a very slow process. But, if we start turning the wheel now, eventually the ship will turn.
And if you would organize and decide to walk, I won't hire anybody, I mean, what's the worst they could do? Make me not be comp director anymore? Wouldn't that be sad?
As the great Southern comic says, let's get her done. Let's start doing something.
I have two polar extremes of creating writing assignments, and then I try to find some middle ground. One extreme is have a very vague writing assignment, and then I'll do something very specific that comes out of a reading. And students hate both.
I picked up the evaluations, and the first one on the top of the 105 said, big bold handwriting, "This class sucked." And I thought, oh wow. And so then then the person wrote down why he or she thought that the class sucked, so I looked at the others, and they were fine and so forth. But I thought about this, and then I tried to decipher the handwriting. I said, now who was that?
I'm at Louisville, right? Rick Pitino's the basketball coach. He's been there 8 years. I don't think I've ever heard him say the word education once. Put that in.